So this webinar is around secure remote access and secure remote data. There's actually two webinars in this mini series. The first one today is about remote access. The one next week is around remote data. The audience for this webinar is automation engineers who need to interact with machines which are remotely installed. So you need to interact with the PLCs or control systems on those machines. If you're from an IT or networking engineering background, then you may be joining this webinar in order to get a better understanding of the security implications of using a remote access solution. And if you're working for an end user manufacturer where some of the Ewon remote access units are installed, then this is useful for you to understand how it works and how it can be adopted on your site. So we'll be looking today at part one of this agenda, which is about the Ewon and Talk2M solution, how the Ewon and Talk2M remote access solution works, the security aspects of it, the hardware, which is the Ewon COSY unit, and then how you use the various tools that Ewon provide to access your Talk2M account. So there are two component parts to the Ewon remote access solution. The first is the Ewon hardware, and the Ewon hardware, whichever model you use, it's an industrial grade remote access router. And that works in conjunction with the Talk2M remote access connectivity cloud, which is a VPN cloud hosted by the Ewon people. So the Ewon itself, all the models are pretty cost effective. They're industrial grade. They're pretty simple to configure, especially the COSY unit, which is the one we're talking about today primarily. You don't need to be an IT expert. You need to know your way around the basics of networking, IP addresses and such like, but that's pretty commonplace, that sort of knowledge. And once you've actually got it up and running, the sorts of things you can use it for are to monitor and diagnose PLCs and HMIs on remote machines. You can do backups from remote machines, and you can do all the things that you would do if you were actually on site with an Ethernet cable and a laptop, but without the wasted time and cost of actually having to travel to site. So it's very good for installations, commissioning and servicing and such like. To satisfy the IT security people, it's a very IT friendly solution, and I'll cover what that means in a little bit. And it's been proven with a very, very wide range of industrial devices from a very wide range of manufacturers. So here are some names you'll recognize. Effectively, if you have a device that can be programmed locally across an Ethernet cable, through an Ethernet cable, then you can program it remotely through the Ewon device in exactly the same way. So a little bit about the Talk2M Remote Access Cloud. You can see a heat map at the top of this page here that shows where the Ewon servers are. So you have servers dotted around the world in various locations, and the orange is where the Ewons are located. So you can see the servers and the Ewons coexist, and the Ewons are, as you can see, located in all the places where you'd expect where the industry is. In total, there are over 300,000 Ewons currently active on the Talk2M system, and over 1 million remote access connections are made every year. That's probably a much higher number than that, actually, especially in the last year with COVID. And with people not being able to travel or not wanting to travel, millions and millions of hours of travel of cost and carbon has been saved by people not having to travel to site. The obvious question is the Talk2M cloud free to use? And the answer is yes. There is a pro version, which a small number of customers use for specific purposes, but 99% people use the free service, the Talk2M free service. And as the name suggests, it's completely free to use. You pay for the hardware, but the service of the cloud is free. It's been around since 2007. So it's very mature. The system itself has 99.6% availability, and that's actually the availability of the server farms around the world where the Talk2M VPN cloud servers are hosted. With regards to auditing and penetration testing and security, there are security certificates and ISO security management certificates readily available. The one on the left-hand side is the ISO one, and the one on the right-hand side is a penetration testing one. These are updated on a very regular basis, so you can get these readily from the Talk2M pages of Ewon, and you can download those and provide those to customers if you have customers who are jittery about security, or perhaps want to know about security or how this would impact upon them. So here's an overview of how the remote access system works, and this applies to all the models. The models we're looking at specifically today is the one on the left, which is the COSY 131, which is the entry-level unit for just remote access. The one on the right is the Flexi 205 and its sister brother units, the Flexi 201, 203, and 202, which are for more advanced usage, and we'll be looking at those in the webinar next week. So independent of what model you're using, you have the Ewon device and you install it in the panel of the control system that you send to site. And with the Ethernet ports on the front, you connect it up to the Ethernet network inside the panel. So connecting to the HMI, the PLC, the drives, or whatever else you have in your control system. The Ewon will have an IP address on that machine Ethernet network. What it then does is when you power it up and turn it on and it's configured, it makes an outbound connection out from the site to the Talk2M cloud. Now, the word in that sentence that's really important is out. It's an outbound connection. So the firewall allows the connection from the inside, the safe side of the firewall, out to the Talk2M, out to the internet, which is the unsafe side. So the whole point of firewalls is they allow outbound connections, but they stop inbound intruders. Now, the port that's used for this outbound connection is port 443, which is the port that every single person on the planet uses every day when they're browsing the internet, because port 443 is the secure browsing port. So all firewalls on all end user sites will have 443 open, or to a certain extent can have 443 open. This is a conversation that happens, sometimes you have to have with IT people to make sure that port is open, but generally speaking, that's an easy conversation because 443 is a very, very known port and it's something they're used to having open in the first place. So that's what's happening on the right-hand side. The Ewon is making an outbound connection, an outbound VPN to the Talk2M cloud. So this green line here is a VPN tunnel. On the left-hand side, you have a laptop with some programming software, and the person that needs to access perhaps the PLC on the right-hand side launches his software called eCatcher, which is a VPN client software for Windows, which is living on that laptop. That person would sign into the Talk2M account, the same Talk2M account where this Ewon will have been registered to during its configuration phase. When the person signs into the Talk2M, they would see the ends of these VPN tunnels. So they would see these connections coming from the sites, and the person using eCatcher would simply choose to make a connection between their VPN and the site's VPN from the hardware. So at that point, you can now see there is a routed path between this laptop on the left-hand side through the Talk2M through to this Ewon. And at that point, you can then make a connection through to the Ewon and through to the devices behind it. In effect, what you're doing is you're making a very long cable all the way from your laptop on the left-hand side through the Talk2M cloud, all the way through. So your laptop is effectively joining the cables on the right-hand side inside this machine network. So as I said before, the golden rule here is if you can put this laptop over here on these blue cables with your head inside the panel when you're on site, you can do exactly the same things over here when your laptop and the site are many miles apart. Once you've got this connection up and running and you can ping that Ewon, you can ping that HMI, you can ping that PLC, you can ping that drive, you can then launch the programming software for those devices and program them as if you were on site on the end of a direct cable. Now, the obvious question following on from this is how does the security work, and how do you nail down the security so that the people on site are happy that they are in control and you're not going to do untoward things to their machine from afar. Now, the very first thing is that you can enable an input switch to the Ewon. So on the back of the Ewon, there are a couple of digital inputs. And with those digital inputs, you can enable and disable the VPN, which was the green line we looked at in the last slide. So you could actually have an Ewon on site, perfectly configured, ready to go. And when the site engineering staff need remote help, they would flick that switch and the Ewon would then establish its VPN and go online, and the remote the remote machine would then be accessible from the engineer. So that's a very useful way of giving the end user site the understanding that they are in control of the remote access. It's not remote access that's available all the time. It's a remote access which is available when they specifically request for it. Now, this is a digital input on the Ewon, and I've shown it here with a switch, but obviously you could make that a relay output from a PLC or some control device, which you could enable and disable via a touchscreen or some logic in a PLC. So it's very straightforward to do. Now, the IT people on this site might be interested about the firewall. Do they need to do anything to that firewall? Is that firewall safe? Is the use of an Ewon somehow making their site hackable from the outside? Well, the answer is no, because all inbound ports on that firewall are closed. The use of an Ewon doesn't require an inbound port. It simply requires an outbound port. As I said before, it's outbound port TCP 443, which is commonly open. You can also add various rules in this firewall, such as the Ewon's IP address or the Ewon's MAC address. So that site firewall could be looking for only this particular device with this particular MAC address sitting on this particular cable with a particular IP address can make a connection out. And it could make, in the firewall, you could also add rules that the Ewon can only establish a VPN to particular known a small number of IP addresses where the Talk2M servers are known to exist. So using those sets of firewall rules in a firewall device, you can get some pretty good filtering to make sure that only this Ewon on this cable can even make a connection in the first place. When it is making a connection, it's using industrial grade encryption and authentication standards, SSL and AES. And again, technical documents about this are available from ourselves on Ewon if you want to put those in front of IT security people and make sure they're happy with them. Some sites have not only a firewall in existence between the network and the internet, but also have things called proxy servers, which are security access devices or security access systems. You can also set settings in the Ewon for the proxy server access. So that's fine too. Now, once you've actually set all this in motion, the final piece of the jigsaw is that the Talk2M users themselves, the ones that are connecting from the machine manufacturer through to where the machine's been installed, it's a good idea to understand that that is the real user, not someone using that person's credentials, but to pretend to be an engineer from that machine supplier. So in addition to all of this, you then have two-factor authentication, by which I mean that the person signing in using his eCatcher software is challenged to provide a one-time passcode, and that one-time passcode is sent to that person using an SMS text message, the sort of thing that you would commonly do with your online bank or a service provider of some description. So let's move on to looking at the hardware that you'd use with this solution. There are three types of COSY 131, and you can see on the pictures at the bottom here, the only thing that really differs between them is the left-hand one connects to the internet to make the VPN using an Ethernet RJ45 connection. The middle one connects to the internet using a Wi-Fi connection on site, or it can use Ethernet. And the one on the right-hand side here can use a SIM card in the back and it's a 4G connection to the internet. So this actually requires no connection to the site network at all. And this one is particularly good if you have customers that simply will not allow you anywhere near their network, but they still want remote access for their machines. So each of these devices is identical in terms of the way they operate. The only thing that's different is the media that they're using to reach the internet. Each of these units is a low-cost device. An Ethernet unit here is less than £500. They're very simple to configure. It's just a few steps. The steps are connect them to the network, connect them to the internet, and connect them to Talk2M. You can do those steps manually through the GUI, or you can use a USB stick. So you can see on the front there's a USB port. So you can do the configuration offline, save the configuration file to a memory stick, give that memory stick to someone, and they can plug that USB memory stick into the front. The Ewon, as you power it up, the Ewon will recognize there's a USB stick with a configuration file and would adopt that configuration into its memory. So very simple for a non-technical person to configure and deploy. You can also do a couple of other things. The input one I mentioned earlier, which is the Talk2M enable and disable input. That's typically what it's used for. You can also send out, using input 2, a predefined email. So it's not uncommon for a machine to want to send out some alert message if there's a problem with it. So you can predefine as very simple or a very simple email or an SMS, which the Ewon can send if input 2 is activated. So a sequence might be input 1 activated to enable the machine to make the VPN, input 2 activated to send a predefined help me message back to HQ, and then an engineer would then use the eCatcher software to connect in. The output light on the front of the Ewon and the output connection on the back, which is again a DC output, can be used to hardwire an LED to the front panel. So when the VPN is activated, you can have an indication on the front of the panel that the VPN is online and working. So we've talked about the security, we've talked about the Talk2M system. So how are the ways that you can use your methods to reach your Talk2M account? The first one, which I've mentioned before, is the desktop client software, which is the VPN remote access software called eCatcher. And this is used for managing your Talk2M account, remotely accessing it for PLCs and programming. It's a client that runs in Windows. In addition to that, the eCatcher, in addition to the Talk2M cloud itself, there is a web browser portal for the Talk2M system, which is called M2Web. So this is used for using a browser to reach your Talk2M account. So if you had a smartphone or a tablet or just a Google Chrome or one of the other Internet Explorer or one of the other browser applications, you can type in your Talk2M credentials like you would use with eCatcher, and you would be able to access the web browser inside the remote Ewon device, and you would be able to access the web browsers in the devices sitting behind the Ewon device, such as web browsers in PLCs, web browsers inside HMIs. And you can also use this to reach VNC servers. It's quite common for HMIs to have a VNC server running in them, and you can use the M2Web service to reach those as well. In addition to using a computer or a tablet and a browser, there is actually a version of eCatcher which is specifically designed for mobiles, and you can run that in Google, in Android, or you can run that in Apple. So you would get the same ability to reach your systems in order to see the status of your machines using a mobile app. And this becomes particularly useful when you start using the Ewon COSY's bigger brother, the Ewon Flexi, whereby you can start seeing remote data from the machines shown on a mobile app. And we'll be looking at that in a bit more detail next week. So just as a quick agenda recap, this is part one, and what we've been looking at is the Ewon COSY and the Talk2M cloud, how the Ewon Talk2M Cloud solution works, a little bit about the security, and the Ewon COSY units themselves, and accessing your Talk2M account. Next time we'll be looking at remote access and how you add data on top of that. So how you get data from remote sites and remote machines back to you. How you would possibly migrate from a simple remote access COSY solution through to a more complex and more powerful Ewon Flexi data-based solution. And some of the more advanced uses of the Ewon Flexi, such as taking data and logging it back to HQ. And then how the Ewon fits in with a journey towards digitalization, because many people these days are moving their machines to be more IoT ready. And this is where the Flexi comes in. And that's the agenda for next week. Okay, so do we have any questions? You mentioned the Talk2M cloud service is free, but some customers take up a paid service. Okay, the Talk2M cloud service is free. Talk2M free is the service used by 99% of people. It has a limitation, which is that you can only have one person connected through that account to an estate of Ewons. So if you are a machine provider and you're providing a small number of machines per year, perhaps a small number of quite expensive machines, so you don't build that many a year, then the chances are that you wouldn't necessarily need to be doing a remote site intervention to solve a problem at more than one site at a time. So in which case the Talk2M free service is perfectly fine. There are, however, customers of ours who install Ewons in quite a large number of machines, and they have a large number of service engineers, and so they need the ability for more than one simultaneous connection. So Fred might want to be on site with one machine, and Joe might be wanting to connect to a machine at a different location. So at that point, the single use would actually cause problems, was they'd be treading on each other's toes. So what people tend to do under that situation, and only when it gets to that stage where they need more than one simultaneous connection, they would then upgrade their account to a Talk2M Pro account. And the Pro goes from one simultaneous connection to 3. It's about £650 a year. It's a flat rate. And once you've got that, you then would have the ability for multiple people to access that. You can also make it more than 3. So if you want 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, you can top that up. You can choose to have as many simultaneous connections as you wish. And you pay approximately £200, £250 a year for each additional user. So that's a choice you make, and it's a choice you only have to make when your users on the Talk2M system start treading on each other's toes. But initially, people use the free service until such time as that becomes a necessity to them. Okay, Alistair has asked a question. I didn't follow what you meant by configuring using a USB device. There's an additional utility which I've not mentioned, which is called eBuddy. And the eBuddy software is the software that you would use locally to connect to a brand new Ewon, which you've just got out the packet, to configure its IP address, upgrade its firmware, all that sort of thing. With that eBuddy software, you can do a configuration of the Ewon locally on the desk. So you can configure it to your Talk2M account and set up all the VPN settings and all that sort of thing, which is done by a very, very simple wizard. And you can do that direct to a device which is directly in front of you, or you can do it without having a device around at all. So you can effectively run a wizard without actually having the hardware there. Once you've done that wizard, it creates a file at the end, and that file you can then put, a configuration file, you can then put into a blank Ewon. So you could do all the configuration of an Ewon without even having bought an Ewon. When you buy your Ewon, the configuration file would go onto a USB stick, you get the Ewon out the box, plug the USB stick in, power it up, and the file will be taken from the USB stick into the configuration of the Ewon, so it's configured very, very easily. Now, if you had a production line of these running and you wanted the Ewons to be clones of each other, so they would literally be each one comes out, gets powered up, gets configured, and the next, and the next, and the next. That's a very simple way to do it. You simply have a USB stick with a common file on, and that file will then be adopted by each Ewon in turn, and that would then link them into your Talk2M account. If you want to know more about the Ewon solution, join us next week. We'll be running a webinar similar to this in a week's time, which is about the Ewon Flexi and the data side of things. You can download the eBuddy software, you can download the eCatcher software from the ewon.biz website, so if you want to have a play with those. If you need to know any more about any particular products that we've talked about today, then obviously drop us an email. And thank you very much for attending today's webinar. My name's Dave Hammond. I'm the product manager for the Ewon products. And if you need us, here are our contact details, so you can drop us an email or give us a call. Thank you. Bye now.